button. And we're live on studio.
All right, so we're getting ready to go live with the today's Ask Me Anything from Football Diehards. I'm Bob Harris. He's Emil Kadlec. We're just kind of sitting around shooting the breeze before the YouTube goes actually officially live. So we'll be watching for that and get to your questions and get in the chat there when that happens. In the meantime, we'll have some great stuff planned for today. Emil, some talk about some news and information, of course, in between your questions. But you brought up we were having an interesting conversation this morning, and just one that, I think is generally pretty good. Yet we were talking about a certain piece of news or another. And, you expressed skepticism at the reporter. And this is something I battle every single day, right? Because I don't believe anybody. But you have to report news to a degree. And, the way we can report it or, discuss it and put in context is always helpful. But there are times you have to put up news, like on Sundays during the season. I believe about a third of everything is reported on NFL Network. And a lot of it's just repeated of things that we've already reported through the week. And you're sitting there going, why am I doing this again? Well, because they're saying it. And people are going to hear it, and they're going to wonder why you're not reporting what somebody said. And so we walk a fine line all throughout. But one of the things about this particular piece of news was it was Patriots related, but there was talk about Scott Miller. And the thing that I'm looking for when I'm looking at news is one guy, two guys, three guys. And the thing we heard this morning was actually the third guy using the same exact phrase about a player. In this case, it was Scotty Miller, the Patriots receiver. Everyone has said the same thing. Coaches love him, that particular phrase. And so, they're all hearing the same thing, and you're hearing it from three different people. These are the kind of dots we're trying to connect here, especially this summer, Emil. Where we don't, we're starting to see a little bit on NFL Network where, there's actually, we're seeing some actual footage, some film from camp. So in addition to the verbal reporting and the written reporting, we can kind of add some or lend some credence to that with our own eyes. But boy, it's tricky. Navigating the narratives that certain reporters have and trying to dig through that is always a tricky situation.
And it's the Tampa Bay receiver, not New England.
Yes. Yeah, as a matter of fact, yes.
How many times are we going to do that before we...
Almost as many times as I call the Washington football team the Redskins. And the weird one is I don't call the Las Vegas Raiders the Oakland Raiders hardly at all. That one seemed to just come naturally. I've talked to other people, when you talk on the radio all the time, it just seems like the Las Vegas Raiders is one we haven't screwed up, where the Washington football team still, the Redskins leaps to mind on a regular basis. So there's a little news out of there this week too that maybe we'll touch on a little bit. The Alex Smith news, which is great news, but we will, again, you put these things in context with a series of things that kind of works out a little better for you. In Alex Smith's case, and we are live now, so that's great. So welcome everybody to the. Let me mute my feed so I can hear it. And already getting some questions. Let me just greet everybody in the chat. I'm Bob Harris, senior editor of Football Diehards. He's Emil Kadlec, publisher and editor-in-chief of said website and outfit. So, Emil, how you doing today?
Having fun. It's Monday, and we're rocking and rolling. Great time of the year.
Yeah, we already have some questions we'll get to here in a second. Wanted to touch base on a couple of newsy items that are of interest. Let me get this. Hello, everybody. Momentarily, so get your questions in. A couple newsy things though that we wanted to touch on just to stop, and we can talk about more throughout the thing. AJ Green dealing with a tweaked hamstring seems like a minor issue, but is anything with him a minor issue? Is everything going to be of some greater concern coming off a missed season? Probably yes. DeAndre Hopkins also resting a hamstring injury. less of a concern for him, right, because of the history. TJ Hawkinson says his ankle still isn't quite up to full speed. Well, that's not a good sign since he finished last season on IR with that injury. That's something to watch. Jalen Hurd, 49ers receiver, they're having a hard time keeping guys healthy. He's having an MRI. They fear a torn ACL. And Corey Davis activated from the PUP list. So a couple items there of interest as we go through. Emil, anything, as we look at AJ Green, how do you kind of put that in context of what's been going on in the big picture? And, I mean, it's reasonable they'd be cautious with him. How are you viewing this?
Well, I'm already concerned about him for missing the whole year. I thought he could come back, but maybe I was a little bit premature on that. But I got to see something from this guy. I know we're not having any preseason games before I draft him, but I mean, can I see something in practice to where I feel good? I've got to see that before I'm going to keep him where I have him on my rankings and draft.
Yeah, I think we missed the practices where he looked amazing, apparently, because he did. All the teammates were expressing shock and surprise. The young teammates who hadn't seen him play before at full speed were, if you go into the Football Diehards August updates news and notes, you'll find some of their comments where they were very impressed. And he looks like the AJ Green of old to them, but a hamstring tweak is a little worry. I kind of like him. He's going off in like the 6th round of drafts. I think he's a good value with upside. With if he does turn back into what he was, and every season he's been healthy, he's got a 25% target share minimum. That goes back to like 2011 or something ridiculous. So it seems like a really good play and a guy worth gambling on, as long as he's doing something. That's going to be the concern. So have some questions here. We'll jump into to get the ball rolling. Ron Servati, sorry for butchering your name, Brian. Would you deal Christian McCaffrey for Courtland Sutton for Dalvin Cook and Tyreek Hill? This seems like shuffling the deck furniture a little bit to me. You're getting a much better receiver back. I don't know how much you're losing in value at the running back. I think this slightly favors the Cook Tyreek side of this equation because we just haven't seen Sutton as a true wide receiver one yet, and we don't know what Drew Lock is. So how would you see that one, Emil?
It's a gutsy move. You don't want to really get rid of CMC, but boy, you cover two pretty good bases. When you're looking at your overall starting lineup, Dalvin and Tyreek make some sense.
Yeah, Tyreek's a pretty significant upgrade in Cook. I think it's not an unfair deal. If you have the intestinal fortitude, there's another word for that. I won't use it here. But if you have that to get rid of Christian McCaffrey, and look, he's coming off a 400-plus touch season. So, I get where you're going. I think Dalvin Cook, I have him as my running back 4 overall. Tyreek Hill is in my top 5 wide receivers. Courtland Sutton is not. He's down there in the 14, 15 range, so not quite in my wide receiver one. So,
and also, it's a half PPR league, so you're reducing CMC. Tyreek's a guy who isn't necessarily a PPR guy, but scores a lot of long-distance touchdowns, so that pushes it in that direction more.
Yeah, I'm kind of talking myself into this. So, Ryan, I think clearly if you're off, I don't know what side of the deal you're on, but that's exactly the trade-off. You're getting a slightly lesser running back for a much greater wide receiver, and if you have the wherewithal within you to get rid of CMC, knowing what he's capable of, I think Cook could have an equal season. He said he's going to have an equal season. He's saying he's pushing for 2,000 yards from scrimmage as well. So, and in Gary Kubiak's offense, it's entirely possible. So, good dilemma to have there. I don't think you come out too horrible either way. Nicholas King asks, what running backs would you consider taking in the 1st or 2nd round PPR leagues? After that, how far would you let Gurley, Freeman, Bell, Chelsea? Well, Freeman I would let slip pretty far. I'm thinking that's Devonta Freeman.
I would assume so. He's not on the team yet, so
you can let him go. Those guys, the Gurley, Bell, Michelle has fallen down outside in the 7th or 8th round, right? So I think you're getting a value there. I promised myself I wouldn't draft Sony Michel this year because last year was so disappointing. Then all of a sudden, here he is in the 7th and 8th round, and I'm going, I can't pass that up. He might not even play I think he will. But even if he didn't play at that price, it's a worthwhile gamble for a guy who might get 250 some touches. 250 touches if he's the starter. So beyond that, Gurley, Bell going in the third round seems to be about as late as they go right now. Everyone's going running back heavy. If they slipped into the fourth, I'd be surprised. And taking the first, second round in PPR, the list is long. You should go to footballdiehards.com. Check out our rankings. That's all available. Emil, you want to throw out some names on that, though?
Well, first or second round, I'm kind of like Kenyon Drake in the late first or early second. I think you kind of have to take him in the late first. Obviously, Hilaire is huge in the middle to the bottom of the first. The second round, Josh Jacobs I like. He's been kind of forgotten about if you can get him. It's kind of he's going APD right now, middle of the second. So those are some guys you're looking at. Todd Gurley's going in the middle of the third, so you can't, if you want him, you've got to take him in the early third right now. So those are some guys I look at.
Yeah, I think the list of guys, the early rounders are pretty obvious to me, so I'll let that stand. And I think it goes down through Miles Sanders, Austin Eckler, Nick Chubb, Aaron Jones, and then you get into the Gurley range. So let's see, Bill McKenty. I don't know. I'm doing horrible with names today. I wish you were all football players so I'd know them. Due to COVID-19, we have expanded our rosters to 18 players this year. Which backup running back would you go for in the draft, assuming the lead RB on a team is out 2 weeks with the virus? Well, it depends on the team. We were talking about some of the handcuff plays right here. For example, Christian McCaffrey. If you go into the August updates update section, the team updates and news and notes area, you'll find some great nuggets in there that will answer this very question for most every team. Christian McCaffrey, it looks like Mike Davis might be that guy. Everyone expects it to be Reggie Bonifant. That's kind of how it ended up last year. They added Mike Davis. It could still go a little bit either way, right? We don't know that for sure, but Mike Davis is gaining some runs. So what you're going to do is you have to watch the news and information, and if you're drafting now, make some educated guesses. I do think that in that case, and in like if it was Clyde Edwards-Helaire, there's been a lot of questions about that. We have updates suggesting it's going to be DeAndre Washington. I've talked to people who cover the team on a daily basis who think that. So you could the expanded pools and the notion that it's going to take more running backs, that would be the position where guys could just come in and really excel. So if you're drafting in general and you're thinking, wow, do I want to fill those spots with backup running backs? Yes. If you want specific guys, you should go look at the news. And I think, Emil, that's maybe a good point we could talk about. Of all the positions, if you have a COVID issue on a game day, right? I don't know if you expect the backup quarterback to come in and play as good as the starter. Robert Griffin III play as good as Lamar Jackson, or Matt Moore play every bit as good as Patrick Mahomes or whatever. But at running back, you could kind of expect that, or it's entirely possible, right? Is that maybe a good strategy to load up those extra roster spots with running backs?
I think it's a great idea. Now, you mentioned DeAndre Washington. I think he's a good pick in general, because he may end up having some pretty nice games with Kansas City, even with Hilaire playing, as it's happened in the past. That's a hugely potent offense. So, like Elliott's backup, Pollard, he may not be as a smart pick because Elliott's already had the virus. And you may actually obviously they're backups or they handcuffs. Obviously you want to handcuff your players and you have a limited roster. He's got an 18-man roster now, so he can, look at other potential backups like we just discussed. Definitely a good idea, definitely.
Yeah. Which defense was most negatively affected so far by COVID holdouts? Kevin O'Brien wants to know. So New England is the obvious answer to me. I haven't done an in-depth study on the entire range of holdouts. I just know they had a lot, and there were some important guys: Marcus Cannon, Deontay Hightower, Eugene Chung. So I would say New England just off the top of my head. 10-team PPR, thoughts on picking from the number 4 spot in the 10-team. When do you consider Michael Thomas? Is it Thomas versus Kamara? And this is, again, a PPR, Emil. Is that a little early up for both of those guys in a 10-team or no?
Well, you're pushing up a little bit, both those guys. Well, Thomas can go that early. Kamara's really close. So you're not moving up that much. I would look, is it a what's your starting lineup? 2 running backs, 2 receivers, or 2 running backs, 3, a 10 team. There's going to be more talent in the second and third round. So look down at the second and third round, looking at the ADP or do some mocks, see what's available there. And that may allow you to decide or give you the information to decide between Thomas and Kamara.
Yeah, look, you could see, I've seen people argue, I've seen Kamara go as early as third. We saw that in the Kings Classic draft this past weekend. Marcus Grant, our friend from NFL Network, drafted him third overall in a PPR. So it's not out of range. I usually see Michael Thomas start going at around 5. But look, is there a safer play or a perceived safer play? And if you're looking to totally avoid downside, I think you could make that argument for Michael Thomas there. I think in a 10 team, though, I'd probably you have even a little more flexibility because there's going to be a little more depth down the line. So it gives you a little more. You can feel really comfortable going either way there, I would say. Ryan wants to know what we make of the New England running back situation. Michelle Harris, White, Miller, Burkhead, etc. Had Alex Barthon, who covers the Patriots on the Football Diehards program on SiriusXM NFL Radio on Saturday. And he totally punted, like everybody, because nobody knows. It's all going to depend on Michelle's health. He believes, as do I, if Michelle is healthy and ready to play, he's going to remain the starter. There's something to be said for Damian Harris. You think back over the course of the Patriots' history, guy not playing as a rookie doesn't mean he won't come in his second year. In fact, James White, he got 10 touches his rookie season and has come on to be a pretty good player. Lamar Miller went immediately on the PUP list, coming off a torn ACL. He suffered last August, so he's a full year removed. They're probably just letting him get up to speed. I think Burkhead's a guy I'm not that interested in. I think I think with those other guys ahead of him, Burkhead's going to be a really spot play. So I think this is just a matter of trying to get a handle on where Michelle's at, and we just don't have that right now. And I don't know again, with the limited visibility into some of these things, and on top of the Patriots' tendency to be very secretive, it's going to be a tough call until Michelle comes off the PUP list. If he opens the season on PUP, my bet would be on Harris, but we'll have to see how Miller progresses. Emil, Michelle going in like the 7th and 8th round, is that worth the gamble for you? Just with the potential being a starter, or would you rather maybe wait even a little later and go Damian Harris and take that shot?
What I would try and do, hopefully you've got a semi-deep roster. If I was going to take Michelle, let's say the 7th, 8th or so, maybe he slides to the 8th or 9th, I could take him. And right now Damian is going in the 11th round, the 53rd running back. Then you could take him as a backup, and then you got 2 players on New England that if you had the roster space, you're not having to get up a lot, and you hopefully will get a starter out of that. Of course, you hate to play with Belichick because he loves to play with you.
Yes, he will do that. That makes it all more interesting. Warren Taylor wants to know if we should be concerned about players that test positive to COVID-19. Will they wear down as the game season goes on? Have either one of you guys? So I've read extensively about it, have not spoken to actual doctors because I avoid them like the plague. Well, that's not a good pun. Have not spoken with doctors. But look, there's enough of them out there on record, including the league's physicians, the NFL Players Association's top physician, who's a pretty renowned guy in the world of emergency medicine, et cetera. So here's the thing. Players have tested positive, right? The rate is way lower than the NFL expected. The number of COVID opt-outs was like 66, was lower than the league expected. And a number of those guys didn't really have the risk factors. They just opted out because it was more likely they were going to get cut and they took the $150,000 cash. The guys who had the risk factors got paid, I think, $300,000. And, legitimate, look, all the opt-outs are legitimate, but there were guys who really had some serious risk factors. Now that we're into the season, the COVID list, there's a reserved COVID list that players go on if they test positive. And they can come off immediately as soon as they test negative, right? So that list started out with 26 players. It's now down to 16. It's just not – the league seems to have this dialed in pretty well. Look, we'll see what happens when travel comes into play. There are going to be a lot of factors. But if you watch Hard Knocks on HBO, you'll see the Rams and the Chargers, the great lengths they're going to. Everyone's getting tested daily. They're doing a lot to distance. They're doing what they can. Contact starts today. Maybe that changes the whole – game. But I mean, enough players have had it and have worked through it without issue that I think it's not something we should really worry about in terms of wearing down as the season goes on. I think, if somebody tests positive this season, my guess is they'll be forced into quarantine for some period of time. And remember, a lot of these guys are asymptomatic as well, and so they never really feel the effects of it to the degree that it's noticeable. So, I'm kind of playing this by ear. I think, the thing we talked about previously, having extra roster spots to have extra players. I'm not against drafting team quarterbacks either for this reason. If your starting quarterback shows up one day or Sunday morning and tests positive, it'd be nice to have a fallback. Emil, do you have a problem with that?
No, obviously on Sunday morning you may have to put starters in you didn't want to. You made a lot of good points. If a guy goes COVID on you and he's out a week or two, it's going to be an interesting thing. Obviously, you can follow our flash update and see how he's doing in practice. When he does come back, you'll be able to get a good feel whether they're actually, putting him in practice and how he feels. These are young, very, strong, athletic people, and a lot of these age groups, recover quickly, and some of them don't even have much issues to start with. So I think by the time the person starts again, you're going to know whether comes off COVID, you're going to know whether you can start them that week.
Yeah, I think one of the bigger concern is not so much the skilled players, but the guys with the huge body mass, indexes,
That's a good
which
point.
are going to be the linemen, et cetera. So I guess that's more concern. One of the things that has been talked about is, someone's had it, like Zeke Elliott's tested positive. He's got the antibodies. He's a good guy to draft because he won't get it. Well, we don't know how long those last, so that's something that's been pretty much discussed the last month is how long does that immunity last if you have the antibodies? And, this is a novel virus, so there's a lot of things they don't know about it, and they're just trying to get a handle on. That's one of the things they don't really have a good handle on. So, look, it's going to be an unusual season, Warren. You're going to want to be as prepared as you can to make adjustments, and players are going to come out of nowhere and get you something done. So be ready to follow the news closely. Football diehards will have that, and we'll all be sorting through this as best we can. Nicholas King wants to know where you can get the greatest delta in points among position groups. And yes, if there's a position group where the top 5 performers or so blow out the rest. Well, last year it was quarterback for sure, or Lamar Jackson,
Yeah.
9 points more per week over that. So, what I would do, here's what I do, is I go to the commissioner sites that I use, and I just look at average weekly scoring from last season to kind of get a feel for that, given your specific scoring system. And I think that's what's important. For the most part, I do think that running back tends to be, not necessarily the top 5, but maybe the top 12 to 14, and then there's a large fall off where the workload starts diminishing. And receiver, a little less so. Tight end, though, for sure, there's a huge drop off in that group. Mike Anderson wants to know, with Brady as quarterback, how do you feel about Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, their outlook this year? Emil, how confident are you?
Well, I'm pretty confident. They both finished quite high last year. I don't have it in front of me. I don't see why they're not going to do just as well, if not better, with Brady. The question is Brady going to be throwing to Gronk or throwing to that third receiver, which we were talking about off the air? Is he going to mix it up enough that maybe it flattens things out? I'd have to go in and look at the numbers. I think they scored a lot last year, so, obviously you want them to continue to score, so are those big guys. I don't think it's going to change. I think those guys are the bigger part of that offense.
Yeah, I think, I guess the question kind of becomes, of interest, is who Tom Brady develops the chemistry with. The early reporting, we talked about that third receiver. A lot of guys getting buzzed there. Scott Miller, the slot receiver, something Brady has leaned on heavily, going back to Welker, Julian Edelman, etc. And Scott Miller's a smaller guy, 4.33 speed in the 40. They also have Justin Watson, a bigger body, a bigger slot player. Chris Godwin plays in the slot, or did a hell of a lot last year, kind of took over the Larry Fitzgerald role in Bruce Arians' offense, which is a big slot, and he was very effective there. But this is kind of, I think it's interesting in all the reporting over the last week or so where people have actually seen them throwing. I haven't heard Chris Godwin's name mentioned much. I hear Mike Evans mentioned a lot. I hear O.J. Howard. I hear Scotty Miller. I hear Cameron Brate. I hear Rob Gronkowski. Haven't heard a lot about Godwin, which is kind of interesting. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think obviously he's going slightly ahead. They're both, going as wide receiver ones right now. And I think the reporting suggesting that Tom Brady looks super sharp is only going to add to that as we get closer to the season. So I think they're going to have fine seasons. I don't know if Godwin's going to have. If Godwin is, we're maybe not drafting him on last year's numbers a little bit, and that's okay, right? But I mean, we just don't know how the chemistry is going to sort out, and that's a big deal for Brady. Karen Perez wants to know who to go for with the 6th pick, and I guess we'll go ahead and assume PPR. Karen, you can correct us if wrong. But I mean, that's been the sweet spot for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. In the drafts I've been in, you'll see McCaffrey, Barkley, Elliott, Cook, Kamara, and then it comes down to, and that Kamara could be Kamara, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Michael Thomas, that trio in there. So I think, in that range, one of those three, maybe the best one you perceive to be coming back to you. Emil, does anyone else jump up there for you?
Well, I think it's not a bad place to be, especially if you like Hilaire. You should be able to get him there. Michael Thomas may fall to you there. He's kind of flipping around. Henry is a guy who probably end up there if you're not worried about the lack of the catching ability. So you got a lot of opportunity there. Even Mixon's a guy who hopefully you could get later, but maybe not. So you got 3 or 4 guys there that you can consider. And like we said, look around, look at your drafts and your scoring, and maybe in your mocks or whatnot, and see who's going to be available in the middle of the 2nd round. And if you got a hot player, let's say you got a really hot receiver in the 2nd you think is going to fall to you, then maybe with that 6th pick you take a running back to keep it mixed up. So that's an initial analysis.
Yeah. All right. And I think that's a pretty fair assessment. Washington battle for running back. Is it AP or is it Gibson? I think, first, we don't know. Second, we kind of know Adrian Peterson is first in line for the carries. We don't know what Gibson's role is going to be. He's a unique player. He hasn't carried the ball a hell of a lot in college. He's a very good receiver. He's a big body. He's fast. He's physical. So he's an intriguing play, and he has rocketed up the ADP charts to the point where I'm getting nervous about him because he's got to really come back at some point. He's got to come back to deliver. Adrian Peterson is still very fairly priced, and he's kind of been the guy I prefer. I want to talk you out of any of them. Bryce Love's a player you need to watch as well. The reporting on him has been very positive. So I'm just looking for the Gibson current ADP right now.
Yeah, again, that's a situation if ADP is going late, and of course Gibson's, they're moving around. Can you take both of them? Can you handcuff those 2 guys and hopefully have the running back for Washington? You may have to spend too much now. It keeps going up. Yeah,
so Gibson right now is 7th round ADP. Adrian Peterson going in the 10th round. I generally go for the cheaper pieces. That's just my tactic. But here's how you might want to look at it, Ryan, is look at your roster construction. Do you need just a guy with a high floor? Just a guy that'll get you a handful of points each week because you have some really high upside guys ahead of him? Then maybe Peterson is your choice. Do you have room? Are your the guys you drafted earlier high workload guys without a ton of upside? I'm talking to you, Le'Veon Bell. Then maybe you want a guy with some upside, and maybe that's when you would go for Gibson. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, should he be a 1st or 2nd rounder? Says Tom. We've talked about this. We will talk about it now and leave it be for a moment. Yes, if you want him, you got to get him in the 1st round.
Warren Taylor, got to take him in the 1st.
Yeah, his current average draft position is about 1.6. So the 6th pick is about where you're going to have to spend on him. And if you're drafting after that, you're taking your chances on him. Warren Taylor wants to know, in a non-PPR leagues, are we moving A.J. Dillon up on our list? I hear he looks amazing. I hear the same thing. I talked to Rob Domofsky of ESPN on Saturday. He had just posted the picture that you've all seen, the thing that you're talking about. He looks amazing, a photo that Rob took and posted on his Twitter feed. Very large legs. You listen to teammates talk. the thing that kind of caught my attention, Emil, is Matt LaFleur, the head coach there, said, "I've never seen a guy like this." Remember, Matt LaFleur was the offensive coordinator of the Tennessee Titans, where there's a guy named Derrick Henry at running back, who's 6'3", 247 pounds. You're talking about A.J. Dillon, about 3 inches shorter, about the same weight. So, maybe a little hyperbolic on Matt LaFleur's part, but obviously this guy's unique. I'm not moving him up, though. But just that said, I think he has a chance, but this is still Aaron Jones' position, and I don't think that's going to change based on how A.J. Dillon looks.
But let's say you take Aaron Jones, and right now the ADP in high stakes, or maybe a slight lag in this, is the bottom of the 11th round. He's the 54th running back taken. Maybe he's a handcuff to Aaron Jones. That would be a smart move anyway. And then maybe if he ends up being a goal line guy, you may be able to start him in situations.
Yeah, that's a great thought. Nicholas King wants to know the top 5 offensive lines, so I'll go back to our magazines. It's the 20th anniversary edition of the Football Diehards, by the way, everybody. If you go to the website, you can order that there along with the Fantasy Football Pro Forecast in its 31st year. Daniel Kelly from Fade the Noise has his rankings in this magazine in an article, and I agree with his rankings. Number 1, Indianapolis. Number 2, New Orleans. Number 3, Dallas. Number 4, Tennessee. Number 5, Green Bay Packers. And, you can get that entire list in the Pro Forecast, and we can go deeper if you wanted to, but that's it to answer your question. And Indianapolis, for me, by far. That's why I love Jonathan Taylor, and I don't care about Marlon Mack.
And it's going to help Rivers, too, hopefully, because obviously he's used to being on his back.
Yeah, he was under pressure a ton last year, and the numbers showed it. How high would we take Deebo Samuel, Emil? I passed one. Currently have Cam Newton ranked 15th, too high, too low. I think that's kind of Goldilocks territory, just right. That's where you're going to have to get him. The ADP has gone up that high. So I think that's a fair assessment, though. But he's got to win the starting job still. And if you look at the Football Diehards Flash Update or August Update news and notes, you'll see some talk about that, and that it's pretty much too early to know for sure. But it's going to be Newton. How high would you take Deebo Samuel, Emil?
Now, what was that last news? Tell me what that last news you wrote about, what the coach said.
They hope he's back week 1, but they aren't sure, right? So and so I can see them being optimistic, and they're having issues at wide receiver. They're bringing other guys. Jalen Hurd, as I mentioned, we're heading into this, may have torn an ACL today, so that's probably already said yesterday, so that's bad news. Brandon Ayuk has been getting some really glowing reviews. But Deebo Samuel, Jones fracture in June, surgery the end of June, timetable for recovery anywhere up to 16 weeks. So, so this could take him in. If he opens the season on the PUP list, that's going to be what you want to look for, and you're not going to know that when you draft. So right now, his ADP is going fairly high. Let me just bring up his current ADP. I'm always surprised when I see him go because I always think it's higher than I'd be interested in drafting him. But actually,
he's like the 42nd wide receiver in high stakes, and there may be a lag there, but bottom of the 7th round.
It's 808 in just overall right now, and I don't know. I mean, look. So
why would the coach go out and say he may be starting week 1? Is that really possible, or is this just some kind of a smoke screen?
Yeah, I think number 1, it is possible. It's probably the greatest end of the range of possible outcomes. And so if you're, playing that game, so the other end of that is he starts the season on PUP. He's out the first 8 weeks for sure, and it takes him 2 weeks to get back in the mix.
And when do they usually put people on PUP?
That's usually the first week of the season.
Yeah, so you're kind of stuck.
Yeah.
Well, if you've got a league where 6 teams make the playoffs, I'd want to maybe take him a little earlier than to make sure to get him if you want to focus on getting him 7th, 8th round or 6th round. And then, hopefully he comes back and helps you in the playoffs. But that's, if you're playing in a really competitive league where it's really hard to make the playoffs, I think I would probably stay away from him unless he falls farther than his ADP.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. And look, I mean, Brandon Ayuk's a guy to watch, and maybe you can get him a little later, although his ADP has risen up to 12th round. So, I don't know how much. That's the problem. I mean, this is the San Francisco 49ers. They are a run-first team. There's generally George Kittle and one other receiver at any given time that are viable. From week to week. I mean, some weeks it would be Emmanuel Sanders last year. They didn't have a lot of huge passing games. The game against New Orleans aside. So, maybe that changes to a degree this year. It's not my expectation. Because of COVID-19, we've switched this year, says Bill McEntee. Bill, I say your name wrong every time, and I apologize, I'm sure. So they've changed from head-to-head to total points. Should I adjust my draft strategy to get more steady Eddie players rather than feast or famine guy? First of all, that's a great strategy in case the season is some truncated or something comes up and it's at a weird time, and the total points is a good way to determine. And Emil's used that for a long time in our leagues to determine playoff seedings, beyond the head-to-head. What do you think, Emil? You want to get more safe play kind of guys in that format?
Interesting point. I'd have to think a little more about it because really you're talking best ball. You're not really best ball because you still have to determine your lineup. So you can't really take flyer guys because you probably aren't going to start them at the right time. I think it's not a bad strategy to maybe lean a little steady Eddie, but still take some guys that have upside. So I would lean that way a little bit. I think it's a good idea.
I think that is a pretty good approach. And Nicholas King, don't apologize. We need questions. It makes this much easier. So the more you ask, the happier we are. No apologizing for asking questions. Sleeper running backs. I'll go ahead and get this out of the way. Ryan is looking for these, and I'll go ahead and get this out of the way because I can't say it enough. Joshua Kelly is a guy I'm drafting crazy late who may be able to jump in. I realize Justin Jackson's there, but just a lot of buzz, and talked to Gilbert Mazzano from the Orange County Register, who covers the team on a daily basis, and I flew this one past him on Saturday, and he totally agrees. He feels the same way. He's a fantasy player as well. Some of these beat writers are, and he felt the same way. He feels this is a guy they drafted in the 4th round out of UCLA. Strong runner, good, well-rounded skills. Our friend Matt Waldman at the Rookie Scouting Portfolio also loves him, but he's got to get past Justin Jackson. But I think, with the price you're paying for him right now, 14th round pick, you could do a hell of a lot worse for a guy who might end up being the thunder to Austin Eckler's lightning. So I like him. There are other guys I like a little bit. I think Zach Moss, Emil, is a player I like. Talked to Mike Shope from WGR in Buffalo, covers that team on a daily basis. And he's also a fantasy player in a league with me. And he says, let me tell you, if I'm drafting any Bills this year, it's Zach Moss, because he walks into the Frank Gore role, which is not insignificant, and he can maybe do a little more with it than Frank Gore did. Now, Am I counting on that? No, but in the 9th round, that's a pretty fair dart toss. Are there any guys you've been targeting there, Emil?
Now, is this the question about the 3 or 4 running backs or sleepers, or is it a different? Yeah, I think Dobbins
in half-point PPR.
Yeah, see, Dobbins is a good one. Now, I'm not sure where we're talking. We're talking maybe a little higher than those, but Dobbins in a half PPR, he's the 30th running back. You got Ronald Jones, who a lot of good things have been talking about him. I'm in on Zach Moss. He's nice and late. So those are some excellent players. And in my deep leagues, I don't mind taking Darrell Henderson for the Rams. He's what is his ADP? Round 11, the 49th running back. He's got some potential. Didn't do much his rookie season.
Right, and I think Jordan Howard is not a bad player. He's on a bad team now in Miami, but in a half-point PPR. And James White, it's a half-point PPR, Todd Ullman. I see you out there. In a non-PPR auction draft, what percentage would you spend per position? I think the generally accepted, norm for it depends on, the level of player. Your top player should be about, 25%, 25% of your total bankroll. So spending by position, not kind of how I do it. I tend to do it by the high-end players. Rodgers or Wilson, Karen Perez wants to know. And for me, it's an easy answer. It's Russell Wilson. So I'll just leave it at that.
Easy.
Yeah. Yeah, so we have Timothy Miller. What rookie wide receiver do you think can make the biggest fantasy impact this year? I like Justin Jefferson and Henry Ruggs as my two picks. They look like they walk right into certain roles. Maybe Ruggs is a little higher up the pecking order. Minnesota's going to be run heavier. I know Jerry Jeudy's going to be a very popular pick as well, and he walks into an immediate role. Just not sure what I think of Drew Lock yet.
That sounds good to me.
All right. Let's see. Where do you put the majority of your chips on KC wide receivers? And Kelsey, could Mecole Hardman cut production from Hill? Again, talking to the people who cover the team on a daily basis, no. Hill, the expectation, talk to Pete Sweeney from Arrowhead Pride and a local television guy there as well. And he loves Mecole. He loves Mecole Hardman, but he just doesn't think the role is going to change much. And he thinks it's going to be similar to last year, where aside from Hill and Kelsey and whoever the running back is, Clyde Edwards-Helaire this year, those are the guys you want to play, and the rest of them you're taking your chances on. I don't think that changes. He thinks Hill is out to prove he's a truly well-rounded player, not just a speed receiver. We've seen the flashes of that in the past. He just needs to stay on the field. Emil, is there one of those other three receivers, or four, is it? Byron Pringle in that mix. But Mecole Hardman, Sammy Watkins, and Demarcus Robinson, do any of those guys interest you, or are they more like best ball flyers?
Well, they're best. I was just going to say they're best ball guys. It's so difficult unless Hill gets hurt, which you ought to be watching if you have Hill. It's just so hard to take those guys. Depending how deep if you got a deep league, certainly you can take one, but I just stay away from them. I find other teams where a player may end up being, a first or second receiver, even though they don't score as many points on those teams.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Jeff Clark needs a running back or wide receiver that no one is really looking at in the 15th or 18th round. Well, I would tell you Joshua Kelly, but that's all I'm looking at in those rounds. I think right now Jerick McKinnon's going a little earlier than that. He's a guy I'm looking. Todd Ullman would love me to tell you that Carlos Hyde is that guy, and I have no love for him because I'm all in on Chris Carson, Todd. So that's why no love. I'm trying to keep bad things from happening to my guy. But as the backup, and eventually I think, Rashad Penny will be back in that mix as well. Emil, anyone you like? I like Steven Sims as well, the Washington receiver, very late. There's a lot of guys that I like really late in best balls. Emil, anyone that you have a preference for there?
You named most of them. I did Mitch Henderson before, which I don't know if he's a 15th rounder. I'm going down in there. Armstead at running back as a backup for Jacksonville. You can get him that late. Carlos Hyde, you can get him that late, at least from what this is saying. You mentioned McKinnon. There's a lot of guys here. Even Darwin Thompson, although I don't know if I'd waste his. That's just a wild card for Kansas City. Bryce Love, Bryce Love for Washington. He's an interesting guy deep.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of guys out there. I mean, we talked about DeAndre Washington being the possible handcuff or likely handcuff for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Maybe he has some standalone value. And those are some of the guys you're looking for, those backs. Boston Scott, maybe.
Boston Scott.
Wide receiver. Yeah, there's a ton of guys at wide receiver. Every day it seems like there's a new one I like that I'm drafting super late in drafts. And I think that's, I guess the real answer here is there's so many of them that it's hard to pick just one. But those are some of the ones that I've been getting a lot of. I think, you're talking about guys like Robbie Anderson maybe in a standard league. Preston Williams is a guy that's going fairly late, but I think a little earlier, probably in the 10th or 12th round for Miami. N'Keal Harry is a guy that's getting easily overlooked. John Ross, Randall Cobb, Cole Beasley. I mean, there's a ton of them, man. A ton of guys. So dig deep and enjoy. There's
those are important questions. Great question. Important things to think about. You want to look for special players in the late rounds. Obviously, more risk, more uncertainty, but one of those guys may pop in and be a wide receiver 3 or a running back 3 or a flex player. Yeah. They're out there. You have to just analyze those guys, and we brought up about 7 of them or so. Right. And I guess, you can only pick 1 or 2 typically with the roster limit, but very good question.
Yeah, the part of the question confused me that no one's looking at. Well, I mean, I don't know any that nobody's looking at because every draft I'm in, I'm seeing these guys go. So I'm trying to find guys that no one's looking at, and those guys aren't getting drafted, so it's kind of hard to say. But those are guys I'm looking at, so if that helps at all, and that I see other people drafting as well. Stafford or Rodgers, we had that question. I'm going Matthew Stafford, but I'm not against Rodgers. I'm not anti-Rodgers. I think he'll have a fine year. He'll probably throw for 4,000 yards, but I think the higher end production seems more likely coming from Stafford as long as he's on the field. Ryan wants to know, is it Taylor or Mack in Indy, Kerryon or Swift in Detroit? Yes. I like Taylor. I mean, obviously Mack's the veteran, and he's going to get the chance to be the starter, it sounds like, right off the bat. But they're calling it a 1-1 punch. I think what I mentioned in the earlier question, they have the best offensive line is of most importance here. So for both of them. Mack is not an inconsequential player. He was really good last year, 1,100 yards in, I think 12 games. Came back quickly from a broken hand, but they drafted Taylor for a reason. He's big, he's super fast, has been super productive, and if he can quit the fumbling, which was a little bit of an issue at Wisconsin, my belief is he'll be the starter after 1 or 2 strong games. Kerryon or Swift? I think it's Swift. Seems like the Kerryon boat has left the docks, but and they just signed Jonathan Williams today, by the way. But I think Swift is the kind of playmaker they're after. If you're adding value in Emil, how do you handle those guys?
Well, I think you got the statistics right there. It's possible Kerryon may start the season just to have that experienced guy pop in there and be out there at the beginning. But I think Swift is going to be the guy, and I the same thing possibly with Mack over Taylor, but I totally agree with you about Taylor. But don't be surprised the first couple of weeks you're kind of going, oh my gosh, they're playing both guys. But once you get those rookies, established and feel comfortable, blocking well on third down, they're going to start to dominate.
Yeah, and don't be surprised when coaches defer to the veteran players with rookies coming in, even high-profile rookies, because that's what coaches do. So, but definitely that's a 1-1 punch. I think Swift is the more clear-cut starter of the 2 rookies coming in at this point, but I expect more from Taylor. Will the dismissal be fired much this year? I don't expect much from Olsen, says Timothy Miller. Lord, yes, the dismissal. Will Dissly in Seattle will be one of those players I'm drafting very late that hopefully no one is looking at. But look, I've heard at least one report suggesting Olsen might be the 3rd most targeted receiver in Seattle. So, I mean, I don't know, I'm not sure what my expectations are. I don't know that I believe that, but someone on the ground does, and enough so to write it and put it in a newspaper. So that's worth noting, and I think they brought him on for a reason. But I think Will Dissly is still the player that he's been. He's just got to stay on the field. The fact that he didn't open camp on Pup, I thought was very encouraging.
Olsen has to stay healthy also.
Yeah.
Something he hasn't been able to do lately.
Russell Wilson?
Olsen.
I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah.
Olsen is, getting up there in years. Nicholas King, what's the best quarterback wide receiver pair? Do you encourage pairing, or is it putting too many eggs in one basket? It is not. Stacking is a pretty common approach. I don't think it's a bad approach. And I think, and also, if you're putting all your eggs in one basket, just make sure it's a really good basket. So, whether it's, Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill, which is a little tricky, Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, which is a little tricky just the way that values have been playing out. But, a little more realistic shot would be Lamar Jackson and Marquise Brown, who's going around the 6th round, so you could get that early. You could even get Mark Andrews, who may well, again, be the team's leading receiver. You could get George Kittle and Jimmy Garoppolo. That would be when you get – but look, there's a lot of high-end duos that I think you can pull off. Is there anyone you've been targeting Emil in that
Those
regard?
are good ones. Obviously, it's kind of hard to get Patrick Mahomes and Hill. I like your Jackson if you get Jackson again. Hollywood Brown, all the good news we've heard from the coaching staff, you still sitting there going, how could I draft this guy? They run the ball so much. But he played very well with the foot issue that lasted the whole year. He's just an interesting guy to get on your roster that you're not having to spend a whole lot. And what the coaching staff said about him, he's kind of a guy I like to try and get on a lot of my rosters.
Yeah, I think any of the top guys, Prescott and any of his top two receivers, I would prefer, getting either Gallup or Amari Cooper. Maybe Gallup is the steadier play there. Kyler Murray, Russell Wilson, I think those are guys you can pair with their top receivers given the way the values are playing out. Matt Ryan, you could certainly pair with almost any of his receivers you'd like, so that one would work out. So, yes, I'm a proponent of that, and it doesn't hurt at all. Just make sure it's good offenses would be the best. Someone on SiriusXM mention Cameron Brate could be a salary cap cut this season or next. Looks like they wouldn't save it. Yeah, I haven't heard that. Buck, I've heard, in fact, today Peter King reported that he thinks Brate might be the second most used tight end on that team, with Howard being first and Gronk being third in the mix. We'll see how it plays out, but I don't think he'll be cut this year. Jeff Clark has both Travis Kelce and George Kittle in Dynasty. Congratulations, Jeff. Which one to move? Whichever one gets you the most in return. I mean, you can make the argument that Kittle's the guy you would prefer to keep being a younger player. But, I think it depends on what you need in return and what you can get in return. Emil, any thoughts there?
Oh, totally an excellent way to put it. And as Todd Ullman said, tight ends can be pretty old and be very productive. So I think it's just see who you can get the most value out of and go with that.
Buck wants to know, are the magazines available at Walgreens or CVS this year, Emil?
Yes, they are. And, if you have any trouble finding them, go to the website and you can order them off the website and we'll get them out to you first class mail.
Yeah, they come quickly. Ryan wants to know how we evaluate the Dallas wide receiver situation. Where do you rank Amari in half-point PPR leagues? So I think Cooper, you're drafting him in that top 12, to 14 range of receivers and not feeling very good about it, or at least I'm not. Kind of the inconsistency we saw last year has been something we've seen his entire career. I think Michael Gallup is the guy I'm targeting at the current price. And I'm not ruling out the possibility of CeeDee Lamb having being a good playmaker. I just think you look at last year's production, and Lamb far exceeded where he's going now. And last I checked, he was in about a 7th round ADP. I'm looking again. Yeah, he's 708, currently the 33rd wide receiver off the board. You could do a hell of a lot worse as your wide receiver 3. I really like that, and maybe I'd be targeting a different guy at the top. CeeDee Lamb is a great playmaker, and I do think there's, especially in best ball, he has some value. I'm just not sure how consistent the role will be, and I say that knowing it could be. There's a pretty wide range of possible outcomes there, including, Dak Prescott's or Amari Cooper's prediction that they could have 3,000-yard receivers. Doesn't happen very often, but it is possible. And by the way, the Cardinals are saying the same thing too. And the Cardinals were the last team to do it. And one of those did it last time was Larry Fitzgerald, along with Steve Preston and Anquan Bolden. Let's see, Bill, would you hold off on doing best ball leagues until closer to the start of the season with so much less real news coming out of team practices? Hell no. I started drafting best balls right after the NFL draft, and I continue doing at least 2 at a time, and sometimes as many as 4 at a time, pretty much unabated. So,
well, but if you're spending money and you only have so much money, you could wait. If you're doing fast ones versus slow, why not wait? Depending on how much you're throwing into it.
I would say depending on how much you want to do. I use best balls as mocks with meaning. And, because there is money on the line. And I know best ball pretends where I mostly play, it's $10 a pop. So it's not like you can just go in and do that. If you do want to just do a lot of practice drafts, which is how I use those, go to the Football Diehards. We have our mock draft simulator. You could do mocks in a matter of minutes. The limiting factor being how fast you pick. The computer will pick the rest based on our rankings. So you get a pretty good feel for where guys are going. And I think that's helpful. But best balls for me is something I use to experiment with. So, I want to be in as many as I can be, to try and test different draft strategies and maybe give you some better answers.
Pardon me. Yeah, and also with best balls, you can find some that are about $3 or so, maybe even some cheaper. I don't know. I like getting ones that there's at least a couple bucks involved, so they're more true than just free mocks or free best balls.
And I think I'll say this for best balls, like the strategy is a little different than, in a regular redraft league or whatever, or any other league, but not so much in the first half of the draft. The best ballsier players tend to start going off in the second half. And so I don't think it skews the value of the guys that you're most interested in that much. But again, if you're playing in just a handful or a limited number of best balls, I would say the later you wait, the happier you will be, as with any draft. So I should stipulate that right there. Ryan wants to know a better ADP, Amari or Kenyon Drake. I don't trust Amari, so I'm saying Kenyon Drake. Not that I trust him completely, but I think he's going off 13th overall compared to Amari Cooper going off at about what?
Cooper's like the 12th receiver, mid to third round.
Early, late third, early fourth. I would rather, trust a guy having a true feature role, and assuming Kenyon Drake is in the locked and upright position, and I expect him to get a role similar to what he had last year, and that was phenomenal. It was true, workhorse workload, and I don't think it would change at all. I mean, it's like, I have the percentages up here. But any thoughts from you, Emil, contrary to that? Would you do it any differently?
Drake is, late first, very late first maybe. I don't think you can wait much longer. Obviously, that ADP is high, but I agree with you. He played so well last year with Arizona. I feel more confident in him.
Yeah,
Amari worries me. What happened last year? I know he was supposedly hurt, but I just didn't like what I saw, and there's so much other talent on that team. I don't know what I just really worry about that.
Yeah, I just pulled up the numbers on Drake. Once he took over as a starter, for the last 8 games, he played 79% of the snaps. That was 390 or 81 of 483 possible. He had 123 or 85% of their 144 carries. 35 of the 43 targets to the team's running backs during that span, 81% target share to the running backs. So that's true workhorse usage, and I think that's pretty fair at his ADP. Let's see. Keep one. Miles Sanders, Chris Carson, or Bell. Lynn, I'm going to assume that these all or not have any values associated, so I'm just picking the best one of this group, and it's going to be Miles Sanders. By the way, that's another guy where, we've, kind of going into the drafting season, I was a little bit ambivalent, and a lot of it had to do with Doug Peterson's history of using, a committee. And so as we get closer to the season and I talk to more people that cover the team on a daily basis, talk to Jeff Mosher from InsideTheBirds.com this past week. I've talked to Adam Kaplan a couple times, who covers the Eagles really closely, and they pretty much everyone who covers the team makes the same point. They haven't had a back like Miles Sanders. And once again, if you go to the FootballDiehards.com August update notes, you will find the latest from Doug Peterson just a couple hours ago, where he basically said, we told Miles he's the man, and we're going to increase his reps. We want to increase his reps. So he was a great playmaker last year. They needed him to be because of all the issues at wide receiver. And hopefully a more diverse cast of talent at the skill positions at wide receiver anyway will just open things up for him. So I'm optimistic about him. I think it's a pretty easy call. And I like him in the order you list him in: Sanders, Carson, Bell. I know some people might vary on that. Probably Todd Ullman likes Bell. Maybe not. Maybe that was an insult.
We will find out. And he's a good. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, he's a good receiver. So you're there. Let's say they're behind. They got to throw. He's still in the game. So he's going to be effective no matter what the game flow is. And he caught a lot of balls last year. He had 50 catches. But you look at the second half of the season, he was getting 5 to 6 targets, and of course catching about 80% of those. So that helps. That's just that frosting on the cake that you love to have.
Karen would like to know at what round we pick a quarterback, and I think this is an easy question for me without getting into specific numbers. I mean, I know where you have to pick quarterbacks. If you want Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes, you're going to probably have to be up in that second to, maybe they make it into the third. depending on the draft you're in. I was actually in a draft this weekend where they made it into the 4th and 5th rounds, respectively. That's pretty unusual. But what I like about quarterback this year, Karen, is I draft until I reach a spot where I hate everybody. And then I pick my quarterback. And sometimes that happens in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round. And the thing about quarterbacks is there's such a wide range of them this year. And there's guys at every tier that I feel pretty comfortable with. So if I miss out on that top tier of Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes, I'm happy to take Dak as my third. A lot of people would prefer Kyler Murray or Russell Wilson or Deshaun Watson. I like a little later, but in that same middle range, Matt Ryan. I think you'll find quarterbacks throughout who you can pivot to if you don't like a spot. As a general rule of thumb, people in this industry like to wait as long as possible as quarterback. That seems to be changing a little bit. And for me, it's changed just based on what else I'm seeing in the draft. So I know that's not probably as specific an answer you want because I don't think there is one. I think it depends on how your draft plays out. Like every draft, they go a little differently, and you have to do a little of it by feel. If you're trying to just say, wow, when is the accepted time? In this industry, the general accepted time is as late as possible. And I'll just say this, Ryan Tannehill going off as the 20th quarterback, in ADP right now, he was a lot better than that last year, right? So, you could wait very late and get a very serviceable quarterback. Guys like Kirk Cousins going as, I think, quarterback 23, 24, 25 range is a pretty good play.
Baker Mayfield, as we talked in the last AMA, all the talent he has, he's another late guy. There's so many late guys. However, it all depends on your league. Let's say it's a 10-team league and you have no PPR and it's 2 running backs and 2 receivers. Maybe in the second round I'll grab Lamar Jackson or I'll grab Patrick Mahomes in a league like that, knowing I can fill those running backs and receivers and tight ends. And if I'm good at that, I've got hopefully the top 2 quarterbacks. But typically, like Bob, I'm looking for Stafford. I'm looking for guys between the 10th and the 12th, the 14th, that could potentially be a great quarterback. You look at Carson Wentz. What a horrible season he had last year. Horrible season. He was the 8th fantasy quarterback. Heck, he could be the 5th fantasy quarterback, and you get him in the 10th round. So if you've got a deep roster with a lot of starting positions, we tend to go late quarterback because there's so much value there.
Yeah, looking at the current ADPs, quarterback 25 is Teddy Bridgewater, Phillip Rivers 24, Drew Lock 23, Kirk Cousins 22, Jimmy Garoppolo 21, Ryan Tannehill 20, Jared Goff 19, and Baker Mayfield in that same. So any of those guys I probably feel comfortable with. One thing you might want to do, Karen, is something I've recommended previously when looking at position groups. Go into your commissioner software, bring up last year's stats by position, and look at the average weekly scoring on your scoring system, and maybe that'll help you realize, give a more visual indication of how late you could really wait and where you want to wait for the different guys. Nicholas King wants to know which players we would avoid at any cost. So this year going to drafts, there were like 2 guys who I really didn't want to draft. They were Sony Michel and Robbie Anderson, and yet here I am with thousands of shares of both. And no, in all seriousness, I think Robbie Anderson is now my most owned player in best ball, just because the values turn out to be right. And I guess the real answer to this is there are no players I won't avoid at all costs. Everybody has value at some point. And, maybe it's later than you expect them to go. And I guess that's the answer. There's guys that I try not to touch that I still end up touching.
And Aaron Rodgers, I wouldn't disavoid him, but there's guys around him that if I end up getting that deep, like Baker Mayfield, I'd rather draft him right now than Rodgers. Big Ben, there's a lot of guys. Even Locke I could take as a second quarterback late, and I'd just rather not Rodgers. Now, I don't avoid him completely, but there's so many guys as a second quarterback I can get. I take them instead of Rodgers.
All right, so I guess, Nicholas, we're copping out. The real answer is all the players I'm avoiding at all costs are guys I'm actually drafting.
Ooh, that's scary.
So Ryan wants to know if Kevin Stefanski hurts the Cleveland receiving core. There's reason, that's kind of been discussed out there. as a possibility because it's going to be a run-heavy approach. They have 2 really good running backs. So I don't think it hurts Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry. I think their value is going to depend greatly on Baker Mayfield having a rebound. And I think his chances of doing that with a functional coaching staff as opposed to the dysfunctional coaching staff they had last year is not unreasonable. Diontae Johnson is a true breakout candidate, as people are saying. Emil, your impression of the Pittsburgh wide receiver?
Well, hopefully Ben will stay healthy. That'll make a huge difference. I like the guy, and you can get him relatively late. You know, there's no certain thing. When people say, oh, this guy's going to break out, we don't know that. But we're looking at he played really well last year. And if I can get him at a good ADP, I'm going to take him in a few of my leagues.
Yeah, he had more catches last year than A.J. Brown, surprisingly. And so, look, the range of guys he's going in, Michael Gallup, Jarvis Landry, Tyler Boyd, Diontae Johnson, Deebo Samuel, Marvin Jones. I mean, I might like some of those guys better, but, you know, I think Johnson, the number to remember here is 1,960. And that's how many fewer yards Pittsburgh threw for last year with Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph at quarterback than they did the year before with Big Ben at quarterback. There's some room for growth here. Juju Smith-Schuster will get some. I think James Washington is maybe one of those late-round players that nobody's looking at. Maybe that's the answer to that question because James Washington gets totally ignored in drafts and probably shouldn't. A year ago,
he's not even going in a lot of drafts. Even
a year ago, he was the Diontae Johnson, right? So maybe that'd be someone to look at in that regard. So the questions are running down. We'll wrap this up pretty soon here. So if you have a few more questions, get them in. I'll just remind everyone to hit the footballdiehards.com website. If you have not looked at our website before, look at it now for free. Go to footballdiehards.com/free trial. If you have looked at it and you said, why haven't I subscribed yet? And you want to subscribe right now, go there and go to the order page, use the promo code DIEHARDS to get a 15% discount on an already amazing price. That includes the digital versions of both magazines, all of our rankings, all of our tools. This year it will include the My Fantasy GM tool, which Emil Kadlec has diligently worked on over the course of the offseason. This is a tool that allows you to bring in all your rosters from across all the major fantasy commissioner software setups. So for me, I'm in 20-plus leagues, right? It's hard for me to do free agency. Not anymore. My Fantasy GM, I import all my rosters in. It assesses them. It compares them with my opponent's rosters, tells me who I need to move on to make the appropriate roster moves, helps me with lineup optimization if I want that as well. Does a ton of stuff. Basically takes all your roster-specific information, marries it with our technology and rankings to make you a winner in less time. I like that. So check all that stuff out on the website. Ryan Lim Briggs has a question. Keep 2 of 3 in keeper. All TDs equal 6 points, 1 to 15 yards passing, and -4 interception. Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, or Deshaun Watson, and the correct answer is Deshaun Watson. And Watson and who, Emil? You're keeping 2 of these.
Oh, I'm keeping 2? I'd have to go look at the interceptions. That's a significant number of interceptions. Whoo! I don't know. I don't know. I would probably say Brady.
I probably would too, but it's pretty damn close. Look, Rodgers is getting all the hate, and I don't know why. I feel like he's just going to come out and make us all look really stupid this year. But, you know, we can see the direction that offense took last year. They want to be run heavier. We know they drafted Jordan Love. By the way, talking to Rob Demovsky again from ESPN the last couple days, you know, he just said this offseason has been really slowed Love's progress, and he doesn't think he'll be ready. He thinks he'll be the quarterback 3 this year and maybe be ready to push up to number 2 next year. So there you go. Best rookie slot receiver to target late rounds. I have my eyes on Rager because he will also be involved in the return game. That's fair. I think Rager's been working at the X spot, though. So, I mean, they're working him in every spot. But I think they want him to play on the outside if Alshon Jeffrey isn't ready to go. So maybe that gives you even more flexibility. I think Justin Jefferson is a guy you're going to see in the slot a ton, where you saw him in LSU, where he was super productive. I think they're working Henry Ruggs out of the slot some in Las Vegas. You know, my guess is they'll be moving him all around. They have a lot of guys capable of playing the slot, including Brian Edwards, a guy you want to go check. There's some really good updates on him in the August update. Aaron, you know, some comparisons. Derek Carr played with a guy named Devontae Adams at Fresno State. That guy, Devontae Adams, was pretty good. There have been some comparisons made to the games of Devontae Adams and Bryan Edwards. A little hyperbolic, probably so, but is it worth looking into? Yeah, given the fact that no one's paying attention to Edwards right now. Those are the kind of tidbits you get in the news section of the August update. Really handy stuff if you like to dig through those kind of little tidbits. We have no shortage of them, putting up many every day, so check that out. But I think Justin Jefferson is the guy I like. I think KJ Hamler is maybe a year away from being a significant contributor. Maybe we'll see Jerry Jeudy in the slot. Some that wouldn't surprise me as well, but Hamler will be that guy in the future, and I don't think he's there yet. So I hope that answered your question. I'll be here a couple more minutes. Take a few more if you got them. Emil, any thoughts on anything we've discussed or anything you wanted to get out there while we have a few minutes to discuss?
Oh, those are some great inputs. I don't really have anything off the top of my head. I'm full up. Looks like you got another question.
All right, how do we think the Jacksonville offense will look under Gruden? West Coast scheme, room for big plays. But from a fantasy perspective, and I don't think Gardner Minshew isn't a guy you can roll with his quarterback, I think just like you did last year. But from a fantasy perspective, Leonard Fournette's going to be very busy. He's going to get a lot of carries, not get as many targets, knock about 50, 60, 70 targets off that target total from last year and give them to Chris Thompson and others, and maybe Laviska Shenault, who's really impressing people in camp. Look, they've got some decent weapons. A lot of this is going to depend on Minshew, but in just general how it will look, it'll look like the same kind of West Coast scheme we've seen Gruden doing since his time in Cincinnati, and maybe he has some better pieces, including, I want to say Leonard Fournette kind of gives him a better option at tailback than some that he's had in the past. All right, everybody. That's it for this one. Again, the schedule for these has been, we're kind of locked in. We'll be doing these Ask Me Anything sessions every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. We'll be doing another one, and we're going to kind of adjust the Tuesday and Thursday night sessions at 8 p.m. Eastern. We'll have mock drafts. I'm probably not going to be in them, so I can sit here and answer other questions, comment on the draft, and bring Emil into the conversation while he's drafting. We'll have some of our staffers from Football Diehards jump in with us, and you guys will get a chance to jump in with us. We'll be sending out email invitations in advance, thinking maybe of doing that an hour before the draft to make sure you show up, or it's on your mind, and so we'd like to do some more
tomorrow night on Tuesday, we're going to have Jen Ryan, one of our staffers, in the draft also with me, and of course commenting with all three of us. Lynn has another question.
Wants to know about Lynn Bowden, and you know what? I haven't heard much of anything. I know he's been working. He's sat in on the quarterback meetings. There's some talk he'll take some snaps. Look, he's capable of being that kind of wild card, wildcat play, receiver, quarterback, running back. I think they'll use him as kind of a gadget type play. Maybe think of Taysom Hill, which means maybe not a role that you can count on as a fantasy owner, maybe more of a role that will irritate you as a fantasy owner. Some play or two away from the guys you're counting on. But maybe there's some upside for more. Hell of an athlete, that guy, and I think the Raiders realize that. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, everyone, for showing up. We'll see you here tomorrow night, Tuesday night, 8 p.m. Eastern, mock draft with Emil Kadlec and Jersey Jen Ryan, and myself blabbering endlessly about it. So we'll see you then. Thanks, everyone, for showing up. Have a good day.